Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin. The Outsider's Diagnosis. Deconstructing the Man with a Hammer. An unusual intellectual proposition emerged from the world of American enterprise in the latter half of the 20th century, one that presented a profound challenge to the very structure of modern professional knowledge. Its author, Charles T. Munger, operated from a vantage point far from the university quadrangle or the research laboratory. His career was inscribed in the domains of law and capital allocation, yet the primary object of his lifelong study became the architecture of human cognition itself. He functioned as a diagnostician, observing the pathologies of thought that afflicted the most credentialed and esteemed minds of his era. His work offers a compelling case study in how a powerful, synthetic intellect, unconstrained by disciplinary allegiance, can identify systemic weaknesses that remain invisible to those operating within the system. Munger's initial and perhaps most foundational contribution was his precise and unforgiving articulation of a widespread cognitive ailment born from the triumph of specialization. The intellectual landscape of the post-war period was defined by an accelerating process of fragmentation. The great engine of scientific and economic progress appeared to be the division of intellectual labor. Universities partitioned themselves into ever more granular departments, each with its own language, its own canonical texts, and its own methodology. The ideal professional was the specialist, the individual who possessed a deep and exhaustive command of a single, narrow domain. The economist, the engineer, the lawyer, the physician, each was trained to a high degree of proficiency within a carefully delineated field of play. This model produced undeniable technological marvels and sophisticated financial instruments. It built the modern world. The assumption was that by assembling a team of these experts, any complex problem could be dissected, analyzed and solved, with each specialist contributing their piece of the puzzle. Munger's counter-observation was as simple as it was radical. He perceived that this very system, celebrated for its efficiency and depth, was cultivating a dangerous form of intellectual fragility. The hyper-specialist, in his view, was becoming intellectually handicapped. By spending a career mastering one set of tools, the expert's mind was being conditioned to see all problems through the lens of that single toolkit. The world, in its messy, interconnected complexity, refused to conform to the neat boundaries of academic departments. A problem in economics might have its roots in psychology. A failure in engineering might stem from a misunderstanding of organizational behavior. A legal dispute might be insoluble without a grasp of basic probability. The system of specialized education was producing minds that were exquisitely prepared for problems that fit their training, and catastrophically unprepared for the vast majority of problems that did not. This insight crystallized into Munger's most famous diagnostic label, the man with a hammer syndrome. The aphorism he popularized, often attributed to Abraham Maslow, states, "To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail." This was far more than a folksy witticism. It was a clinical description of a cognitive tendency with devastating real-world consequences. The hammer represents the powerful, dominant model or intellectual framework of a given profession. For an economist, it might be the theory of incentives and rational actors. For a Freudian psychoanalyst, it might be the role of subconscious childhood experiences. For a certain type of engineer, it might be the principles of stress and strain. The syndrome describes the automatic, unthinking application of this favored tool to every problem that appears, regardless of its underlying nature. The professional, Munger argued, develops a deep emotional and intellectual attachment to their primary tool. Their identity, their prestige and their livelihood are all bound up in their mastery of the hammer. To admit that a particular problem requires a screwdriver or a wrench is to admit a limit to their own competence, a concession the human ego is reluctant to make. The result is a grotesque distortion of reality. The world is pounded and hammered into a shape that fits the tool. Complex social phenomena are reduced to simple incentive problems. Human behavior is explained away by a single psychological theory. Corporate dysfunction is analyzed as a mere mechanical flaw. This cognitive narrowing produces what Munger called standard stupidities, predictable, large-scale errors committed by brilliant people who are blind to the shape of the problem right in front of them. They fail because their cognitive toolkit is impoverished. The consequences of this syndrome, as he observed them from his position in business, were immense and quantifiable. He saw brilliant executives make ruinous acquisitions because they analyzed the deal purely through a financial lens, ignoring the stark realities of corporate culture and human integration. He watched as economic forecasts failed spectacularly, time and again, because they were based on elegant mathematical models that omitted the wild, often irrational dynamics of human fear and greed. The professional world was filled with what he termed departmental thinking, where the finance department, the legal department, and the marketing department each saw the same business challenge as a nail for their respective hammers, leading to incoherent and self-defeating corporate strategy. Munger's diagnosis was therefore a fundamental critique of the epistemology of the professions. He was questioning how modern experts come to know the world and finding the dominant method to be profoundly flawed. His analysis suggested that the division of knowledge without a corresponding discipline of synthesis was an intellectual dead end. It created experts who were masters of the details but blind to the whole. They possessed immense computational power within their domain, but lacked the wisdom to know when their domain was irrelevant. He was, in essence, conducting an intellectual audit of the 20th century mind and finding a critical vulnerability in its operating system. He had identified the pathology with surgical precision. The immense task that followed, the work that would occupy the remainder of his intellectual life, was the search for a remedy, a structured, repeatable method for cultivating the very synthetic wisdom that modern education was failing to provide. He had laid bare the problem of the isolated nail. The challenge now was to construct the intellectual architecture capable of holding the entire structure together. The blueprint for this new intellectual architecture was deceptively simple in its conception, yet profound in its implications. Having diagnosed the systemic weakness of siloed expertise, Munger embarked on his own grand unification project. This endeavor sought to forge a practical, operational toolkit for thinking, one capable of navigating the immense complexity of business and human affairs. He gave this conceptual system a name that was at once homespun and deeply technical, the latticework of mental models. This was his constructive answer to the fragmentation of modern knowledge. It represented a form of cognitive engineering, a deliberate attempt to build a superior operating system for the mind, one founded on the principle that a few dozen big ideas, properly understood and interwoven, could provide a level of worldly wisdom unavailable to the narrow specialist. He was proposing a curriculum for a lifetime of learning, a method for becoming effectively educated. The genius of the framework resides within the metaphor itself. A collection of models, however potent, remains a mere list. The power, Munger insisted, emerges from the latticeworks, the dense cross-referential structure of connections one builds between the models. The models are the nodes, the strong points of understanding, but the latticework is the web of reinforcing trusses that gives the entire intellectual edifice its strength and resilience. Acquiring the models meant systematically mastering the foundational, time-tested concepts from every major discipline: physics, biology, mathematics, engineering, history, economics, and most critically, psychology. His prescription was specific. An individual needed to internalize approximately 80 to 90 of these essential ideas to a point of fluent, automatic recall. This process transforms knowledge from a set of inert facts into a dynamic, active matrix of possibilities. When a new problem presents itself, it is run through this multi-layered filter, revealing dimensions and causal chains that a single discipline approach would invariably miss. It is a system designed to see the world as it is, a complex, interacting whole. To grasp the operational utility of this latticework, one must examine the models themselves and witness their transformation from discipline-specific concepts into universal tools of thought. From the realm of chemistry and physics, Munger imported the powerful concept of autocatalysis. In its native domain, an autocatalytic reaction is one wherein the product of the reaction functions as a catalyst for that same reaction. Once a certain critical mass is achieved, the process feeds on itself, creating a runaway feedback loop of exponential growth. Munger recognized this pattern as a fundamental driver of extreme outcomes in systems far removed from the chemical beaker. He saw autocatalysis in the dynamics of business success. A company develops a popular product, generating profits that are reinvested into superior marketing and research, which in turn creates an even better, more popular product. The success becomes its own catalyst. This model explains the powerful network effects that define the digital economy, where each new user of a platform increases its value, thereby attracting more users in a self-reinforcing cascade. He had abstracted a principle from physical science and fashioned it into a lens for understanding the explosive, winner-take-all dynamics of markets and technological adoption. From the hard sciences, his intellectual search extended into the domain of human behavior, finding equivalent power in the principles of social psychology. He placed immense value on the reciprocity tendency, a concept rigorously explored by researchers like Robert Cialdini. This model describes the deeply ingrained human impulse to repay, in kind, what another person has provided. It is an ancient, powerful force that facilitates social cooperation by creating webs of obligation. Munger perceived this tendency as a fundamental engine of commerce and social organization. In its positive application, it forms the basis of a healthy corporate culture, an organization that treats its employees with fairness and generosity, often receives loyalty and extraordinary effort in return. In a commercial context, it is the mechanism that makes the free sample such a potent marketing tool, creating a subtle, unconscious desire in the recipient to reciprocate the gift by making a purchase. Munger also used it as a diagnostic tool to identify potential failure. He understood how incentive systems could trigger perverse forms of reciprocity, leading employees to game the system in ways that served their immediate interests while damaging the long-term health of the institution. The true analytical leverage of the lattice work appears when these disparate models are brought to bear on a single problem simultaneously. An analysis of a business phenomenon using only the lens of economics might yield a partial truth. A psychological lens adds another layer. But observing the same phenomenon through a lattice work that includes autocatalysis from chemistry, reciprocity from psychology, and perhaps principles of backup systems from engineering and economies of scale from economics, produces a rich, multidimensional, and far more accurate understanding. The models check and balance one another, revealing the complex interplay of forces at work. This web of knowledge provided a powerful defense against error, a way to see the world from multiple advantageous perspectives at once. Yet Munger perceived that one set of models, one discipline above all others, served as the master key for understanding the most common and costly failures of human reason. That master key, the discipline Munger elevated above all others, was psychology. He reasoned with a stark and powerful clarity. All the sophisticated models from physics, engineering, and economics are ultimately processed through the deeply flawed and predictably irrational instrument of the human mind. An intellect, armed with the principles of thermodynamics and microeconomics, remains vulnerable if the operator of that intellect is blind to his own cognitive wiring. To build a latticework of mental models without first understanding the psychology of the builder would be akin to designing a precision telescope with a warped and cloudy lens. The entire enterprise of worldly wisdom, he concluded, rested upon a ruthless, unsentimental audit of the standard ways human cognition fails. The academic world of the late 20th century was, in fact, already charting these failures with remarkable success. The pioneering research of psychologists like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky had begun to systematically uncover a whole bestiary of cognitive biases and heuristics, the mental shortcuts that consistently lead human judgment astray. Their work on prospect theory and framing effects, for instance, demonstrated with mathematical elegance how people's decisions were swayed by the presentation of choices, a direct affront to the classical economic model of a rational actor. Yet these profound insights were scattered across specialized journals, communicated in the precise formal language of the academy. For a practitioner in law, business, or any field outside the university, this knowledge existed as a series of brilliant, isolated discoveries, an archipelago of valuable islands with no connecting bridges. There was no single, accessible map, no grand unified theory of human folly that one could carry into a boardroom or a courtroom. Here, Munger performed his most audacious act of intellectual synthesis. He became the great systematizer of this burgeoning field, a role he fulfilled with his seminal lecture, famously transcribed and circulated under the title The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. Approaching the subject with the mind of an engineer seeking points of failure, he embarked on a project of curation and codification. He scoured the academic literature, extracting, refining, and organizing the essential principles of misjudgment into a single, coherent framework. The result was a checklist of 25 standard causes of human error. He gave them memorable, visceral names that stripped away academic jargon and revealed their practical essence: reward and punishment super-response tendency, liking and loving tendency, disliking and hating tendency, doubt avoidance tendency, and the powerful social proof tendency, the deep-seated human impulse to think and act as others around them do. This was a profound intellectual maneuver. He transformed descriptive science into a prescriptive tool. The list became a pre-flight checklist for the mind, a systematic routine to run before making any significant decision. By externalizing these tendencies, by naming them and turning them into a concrete inventory, he provided a mechanism for metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. One could now actively ask, is my judgment being clouded by the authority misinfluence tendency because this proposal comes from a respected figure? Am I succumbing to the availability misweighing tendency, overweighting the importance of information that is recent and vivid, while ignoring a larger body of statistical evidence? This process converted psychology from a subject of passive fascination into an active instrument of cognitive hygiene. His most original contribution to the field, however, was a concept he termed the Lollapalooza effect. This was his name for the phenomenon wherein multiple psychological tendencies converge and act in the same direction, their combined impact becoming something far greater than the sum of their individual parts. The outcome is a non-linear explosion of irrationality. Munger saw this everywhere, from the spectacular implosion of corporate cultures to the dynamics of open outcry auctions, where social proof, reciprocation, and deprival superreaction tendencies could combine to drive bidders into a frenzy of self-destructive overpayment. A single bias might lead to a minor error in judgment. Two or three working in concert could create a powerful current of miscalculation, but a confluence of 5 or 6 of these elemental forces could produce a tidal wave of folly, a lollapalooza that sweeps away even the most intelligent and experienced individuals. This concept provided a dynamic, systems-level understanding of catastrophic failure. It explained how a series of small, individually plausible psychological pressures could compound into a perfect storm of disastrous decision-making. The utility of this framework has since been recognized far beyond Munger's personal intellectual toolkit. His synthesis presaged and profoundly influenced the formal emergence of behavioral economics as a mainstream discipline. The checklist and the thinking behind it has become a foundational text for professionals operating in environments where clear judgment is paramount. Intelligence agencies train analysts to use such checklists to debias their assessments of geopolitical threats. Medical schools are increasingly incorporating lessons on cognitive bias to improve diagnostic accuracy, helping physicians avoid common pitfalls like anchoring on an initial diagnosis or being swayed by the way a patient presents their symptoms. And in the world of finance, Munger's psychological framework provides a robust vocabulary and a defense mechanism against the emotional contagions of fear and greed that define market cycles. In creating this system, Munger forged the keystone for his entire intellectual arch. This organized understanding of psychological fallibility was the regulatory mechanism for all other models in the latticework. It was the master tool used to calibrate the tool user, ensuring that the powerful concepts borrowed from hard sciences and engineering were wielded with a clear and objective mind. This synthesis of psychology represented his ultimate defense against the most dangerous adversary of all, the unexamined self. It was a comprehensive operating manual for navigating the inherent flaws of the human cognitive apparatus, a testament to the idea that the most profound wisdom begins with understanding the standard ways one is likely to be a fool. The practical embodiment of this cognitive architecture found its grandest expression in the entity known as Berkshire Hathaway. For decades, this conglomerate has served as a longitudinal case study, a living laboratory for the application of Munger's intellectual toolkit. The company's celebrated durability and adaptive capacity can be understood as the direct result of a formidable cognitive moat, one constructed from the interlocking principles of his lattice work. When evaluating a potential acquisition, Munger and his partner Warren Buffett would deploy a cascade of models far beyond the standard discounted cash flow analysis taught in business schools. They would examine a company's competitive position through the lens of ecosystem dynamics from biology, seeking to understand its niche and its relationship with predators and prey in the corporate environment. They would analyze its internal feedback loops using concepts from engineering and cybernetics, looking for self-reinforcing mechanisms that either propelled success or guaranteed failure. They would apply principles of thermodynamics, like the concept of entropy, to understand the constant forces of decay and disorder that every business must fight to overcome. Overlaying this entire multidisciplinary analysis was the psychological checklist. Every proposition was filtered through a deep understanding of human fallibility. They assessed the potential for management to succumb to the incentive-caused bias, for competitors to fall into commitment and consistency traps, or for the market itself to be swept up in a tide of social proof. This process transformed investment from a game of prediction into a discipline of inversion and avoidance. The primary goal became the sidestepping of catastrophic error. The sustained success of Berkshire Hathaway, therefore, stands as powerful empirical evidence for the efficacy of the Munger system. It demonstrates that a diversified toolkit of mental models, regulated by a profound skepticism about human judgment, can create a decision-making framework of immense power and resilience, capable of navigating the complexities and uncertainties of a half-century of economic history. The intellectual capital of the firm was its chief asset, a fortress built of worldly wisdom. The very durability of this intellectual edifice, however, raises a profound and perhaps unsettling question for our contemporary technological landscape. We have entered an era defined by a different kind of analytic power, one rooted in the brute force of computation, big data, and the opaque yet powerful correlations identified by machine learning algorithms. This presents a fundamental challenge to the Munger-esque ideal of the individual master synthesizer, the solo human consciousness, holding 100 models in elegant, dynamic tension. The polymath's approach, predicated on deep, causal understanding derived from first principles across multiple fields, now coexists with quantitative strategies that can process billions of data points, finding profitable patterns without any appeal to a human-readable narrative or a unifying theory. The tension is palpable. Munger's method is one of profound intellectual humility before the complexity of the world, a humility that drives the quest for broad foundational knowledge. The algorithmic approach, in contrast, often proceeds with a kind of epistemic agnosticism, focusing on predictive accuracy above causal explanation. A quantitative hedge fund might build a successful trading model based on the statistical relationship between weather patterns in Brazil and the price of a certain tech stock, a correlation a human analyst, even one armed with Munger's latticework, would likely miss and certainly struggle to explain through a coherent first principles narrative. The central query for the 21st century becomes whether the polymath's deep, integrated wisdom is still the optimal tool for navigating reality, or if it represents a beautiful, highly evolved cognitive strategy now being outcompeted by a new species of intelligence. This leads us to the ultimate consideration of Munger's legacy. His life's work can be viewed as a grand, eloquent, and perhaps even tragic defense of a particular form of humanistic, integrated judgment in a world increasingly yielding to the specialized, the computational, and the algorithmic. He stands as an epistemologist of the practical world, a philosopher whose primary text was the messy, probabilistic reality of business and life. His contribution was a comprehensive system for how to know, a methodology for thinking that armed the individual mind against its own inherent weaknesses and the overwhelming complexity of the external environment. The lattice work of mental models is his proposed solution to the problem of specialization, a way to reclaim the holistic perspective of the Renaissance thinker in an age of hyper-fragmented knowledge. The final question, then, is one of futurity. Is this worldly wisdom the final, highest expression of a bygone intellectual era, a magnificent cognitive fossil from a pre-algorithmic age? Or does it offer a timeless roadmap for the future of thought itself? A compelling possibility emerges. The Munger framework, with its emphasis on first principles, inversion, and the identification of psychological bias, may provide the essential architecture for human-AI cognitive collaboration. As artificial intelligence becomes a ubiquitous tool for pattern recognition and data processing, the uniquely human capacity for wisdom, for asking the right questions, for understanding context, for defining ethical boundaries, and for synthesizing knowledge into a coherent worldview becomes paramount. The lattice work of mental models could become the operating system for the human analyst who directs, interrogates, and ultimately makes sense of the outputs of these powerful new computational tools. Munger's great project, therefore,
might find its ultimate relevance as the very blueprint for how human judgment maintains its value, its purpose, and its authority in a world it must now share with intelligences of its own creation. His legacy is an enduring challenge to build better minds before we build ever more powerful machines.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.